of diplomatic tension between South Africa and the Kingdom of Eswatini after the king, King Mswati, allegedly ordered his armed security officers to invade South Africa and kidnap Liswati, who's a pro-democracy underground force commander. The influential commander, Thabo Kunene, was kidnapped and trafficked to Eswatini about 4 weeks ago now. And more on this, we're definitely joined by an independent journalist who's writing for the Swaziland News, Zweli Dlamini, who's also described as a terrorist in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Zweli, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on Rise FM. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, do we know where Kunene is currently, and how did the whole kidnapping happen? I mean, how did the security force get over the border with him?
Okay, what really happened? Thabo Kunene, who is the alleged commander of the Swaziland Solidarity Forces, was allegedly kidnapped in South Africa, and when that transpired, we received the information and quickly published it, and that's how his life was saved. And he was subsequently trafficked to Eswatini through informal crossing. And the information that we have, actually, there were security officers, police officers from Eswatini who were consistently crossing the border to hunt Kunene and other political activists. And what happened thereafter, Kunene was allegedly trapped by one alleged traditional healer by the name of Andile Ngomonye, who is known as Dr. Mkulu. And he was then held hostage within an unknown location in South Africa. And thereafter, he was then kidnapped and handed over to the security forces who were on the South African side. Currently, is kept at Matsapa Maximum Prison.
Sure, yeah. I mean, what is he accused of, and why is he targeted from the other pro-democracy activists?
Thabo Kunene is the most influential political activist. It is alleged he was the commander of the pro-democracy underground forces, and you will recall that in Eswatini, the country is fresh from a political unrest whereby thousands of civilians were killed. And then what happened, the Swaziland Solidarity Forces were then formed to try and mitigate the killing of civilians in Eswatini. So Thabo was allegedly part of the underground unit of the pro-democracy movement in Eswatini. So the security forces have been hunting him for some months. And subsequently, as it is alleged, he was then trapped and trafficked to Eswatini.
Obviously, he's kidnapped from in South Africa. What has been then the South African government's authorities saying? I mean, what are they saying around some of this? I mean, are there even investigations to verify this kidnapping allegations?
Actually, there is an organization, a political organization in South Africa that is somehow a coalition of Swazis in the diaspora, the Eswatini United Diaspora. They are working on this matter, and other advocates and lawyers in South Africa who are sympathizing with the struggle in Swaziland. And they have reported a case with the South African police, a case of kidnapping and torture. And apart from the criminal aspect of the matter, there is also the diplomatic aspect whereby the United Eswatini Diaspora is pushing for sanctions against Eswatini. You will understand that South Africa is most influential in Swaziland in terms of trade. So they are pushing that this matter must be discussed because it grossly violated the sovereignty of South Africa. And South African laws were violated, considering the fact that Eswatini police invaded South Africa and kidnapped a citizen. Even if Thabo is a Swazi, but the fact that he was in South Africa, he was protected by South African laws. So it is in this regard that the matter is being pushed both criminal and diplomatically.
But I suppose, look, you are among those who are labeled as a terrorist by the Kingdom of Eswatini's government. I mean, looking at the views that have been shared before, and I know that in Eswatini, mainly the Swazi government has been complaining that South Africa was harboring alleged terrorist? I mean, when you hear such incidences yourself, are you then not scared?
I'm a journalist, and I know, I think last year I was labeled a terrorist. But it's not only me, even the People's United Democratic Movement, one of the leading political organizations in Swaziland, they were labeled as a terrorist entity in 2008. So anyone who is challenging the government or who is critical of the current regime is labeled a terrorist. And 2 pro-democracy MPs are incarcerated. They were found guilty on terrorism charges. So it's not only Thabo Kunene or myself as a journalist or Putiemo. So it's the Terrorism Act is being used to silence dissenting views in Swaziland. So currently Putiemo is challenging the law within the Supreme Court. And but what is more interesting is the fact that the terrorist description or proscription is only in Swaziland. South Africa seem not to be bothered whether you are labeled a terrorist or not. If you are a freedom fighter, you are welcome to South Africa and they will protect you. So I think this matter of Thabo Kunene will be handled both diplomatically and criminally.
Also looking at what the King's spokesperson, Upesi Simelane, said, he says that well, it seems that he's not convinced that the king is somewhat linked to some of these alleged kidnappings. I mean, what are your findings, telling us, or somewhat when you reached out to him? I mean, what do you read of what they know within the palace?
What you need to understand is that the king, in his capacity as the commander-in-chief of the police, somehow these police officers were acting on his command. And King Mswati has been threatening those calling for democracy. He also hired mercenaries from South Africa who have been terrorizing civilians. And it is alleged that they are also linked in the killing of Tulan Masego. The human rights lawyer was assassinated in January. So by the mere fact that Dr. Mkhulu, who's the one who held hostage Thabo Kunene, he did mention that they were acting on the instructions of the king. But it remains to be seen if he will come out clearly and disassociate himself from this allegation. If that's the case, he must release Thabo and transport him back to South Africa, because it is clear that laws of the neighboring South Africa were violated and the sovereignty of South Africa was also undermined. So it's a diplomatic blunder.
Yeah, but Zweli, are we also aware of any extradition applications that have been made, or to have some of the activists taken back from South Africa to Eswatini?
An extradition request that was made, it was against myself, but it was dismissed, as far as I understand. And they tried to then search for me, and what they were trying to do is what they did to Thabo. Because once they see where you are staying, then they try to kidnap you. And then once you are that side, they will then claim that they grabbed you while you were crossing illegally to Eswatini. But most extradition requests in South Africa involving political activists, journalists, and other human rights defenders are normally rejected by the government of South Africa. I think that's why then the government of Eswatini has opted to then invade South Africa and grab political activists, which is a thing that must be challenged and dealt with at diplomatic level.
Something that I'm struggling to understand or comprehend is the statement that was also released by the government spokesperson. I mean, how are we all to read into that statement that was released by Alpheus Minimalo, the government spokesperson, praising, this senior superintendent alleged to be behind the kidnapping?
Yes, what you need to understand is that that government spokesperson is too much immature. And I don't even understand how he was appointed in that position, because he has been committing a lot of diplomatic blunders. At some point, And the information that we have, they once suspended him silently, and that information was kept away from the media. Because of such statements, reckless statements, because you can't then say a police officer who invaded another country is a hero, because that statement might be a subject, might be presented in court, confirming that indeed these police officers did invade South Africa, and the government, they were acting on the instructions of the government, because Afios is not speaking for himself, he's speaking on behalf of the state. So that statement on its own is a confirmation that the state commissioned the police officers to kidnap Thabo Kunene.
Really appreciate you weighing in, and it's always a pleasure having some of the analysis of the Kingdom of Eswatini's politics, but I really want to thank you so much for making time.
Thank you for having me on Rise FM. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. That's an independent